At exactly 5 o'clock, a black SUV pulled into my driveway while 40 executives were partying inside. My daughter-in-law thought she had finally forced me out of my own home, but the man stepping from that car was carrying a deed that would end her celebration in 15 minutes. Martha Evans wiped down the granite kitchen counter in her Columbus home, her motions slow and deliberate. Across the island, her daughter-in-law, Vanessa, rearranged a cluster of heavy crystal vases without asking. Vanessa had moved in with Mark 6 months ago after their apartment lease expired, promising it was a temporary arrangement until they found a place in the suburbs. But temporary was stretching into a permanent takeover. "Martha, we need the living room completely clear by 5 tomorrow," Vanessa said, not looking up from her phone as she scrolled through a catering menu. "Mark's regional directors are coming over, about 40 people total. It's a crucial networking event for his promotion, so we need the space to look fresh." Martha set down her dishcloth. 40 people is a large crowd for a Thursday evening, Vanessa. "Did Mark mention this to me?" "He was busy," Vanessa replied coolly, placing a stack of glossy linen napkins onto the shelf where Martha kept her late husband's hand-carved wooden bowls. "And honestly, Martha, it might be better if you stayed at your sister's house in Dayton for the evening. You tend to fuss over the furniture, and it makes the guests uncomfortable." Mark walked into the kitchen, his eyes fixed on his tablet. He grabbed an apple from the basket Martha had filled that morning. "Hey, Mom. Vanessa's right about tomorrow. It's just corporate folk. You'd probably get bored anyway." Martha observed her son's casual avoidance. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Instead of raising her voice or arguing about whose name was on the deed, Martha simply folded her kitchen towel in half, then in quarters, placing it neatly beside the sink. "I see," Martha said quietly. She walked past them toward her study, picked up her binder of financial records, and tucked it into her leather tote bag. The quiet disrespect was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a choice they made every day. She stepped inside her bedroom, locking the door. The next morning, Martha woke up at 6, her usual time. For 30 years, this 4-bedroom craftsman home had been a sanctuary. She and her late husband, Arthur, had spent weekends refinishing the oak floors, planting hydrangeas along the brick walkway, and hosting Sunday dinners for neighbors. But over the last 6 months, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Vanessa had gradually replaced Martha's framed family photographs with abstract modern art, claiming the hallway needed a more contemporary aesthetic for company. When Martha stepped into the kitchen, she noticed her favorite porcelain tea set had been boxed up and pushed into a pantry corner. In its place stood a commercial-grade espresso machine that Vanessa had purchased for the upcoming party. Mark was sitting at the counter sipping coffee and reviewing documents. "Mark!" Martha said, her voice even as she opened the pantry to retrieve her tea. "Did you move your father's hand-carved bowls from the china cabinet?" Mark didn't look up immediately. He took another sip before answering. "Vanessa needed that shelf space for the wine glasses, Mom. It's just temporary. We put them in the garage storage bins." "Those bowls were crafted by Arthur's father," Martha said, standing straight. "They are fragile and hold sentimental value. The garage is not climate-controlled. Look, Mom, Vanessa is trying to impress her boss and my firm," Mark said, a tinge of irritation creeping into his tone. "We're hosting important executives tonight. Can't you just let us manage the layout for one evening without making an issue out of every small change?" Martha looked at her son. He wasn't the boy who used to help his father oil the oak dining table. He was a man willing to erase his own heritage to satisfy his wife's ambitions. Martha didn't argue further. She simply poured. Her hot water took her favorite mug and walked out onto the spacious back porch, where the cool morning breeze felt refreshing, clean, and entirely untainted by their quiet disrespect. At 10 in the morning, Martha carried the heirloom wooden bowls back inside, carefully wrapping each one in bubble wrap before placing them into her leather tote. She then retrieved her late husband's silver pocket watch and her personal journals from the hallway console. She took these items directly to her car and locked them in the trunk. Vanessa emerged from the master bedroom wearing workout clothes, holding a binder full of event schedules. She stopped when she saw Martha carrying a box toward the front entrance. "Where are you going?" Vanessa asked, crossing her arms. "The caterers are arriving at 2 o'clock. I need you to make sure the front driveway remains clear for their delivery truck." "I have errands in town," Martha replied calmly, adjusting her coat. "I won't be managing parking today." Vanessa frowned, clearly unaccustomed to Martha declining a domestic request. For 6 months, Martha had cooked dinners, signed for packages, and kept the house spotless, while Mark and Vanessa focused on their corporate careers. They had slowly begun treating her like an unpaid property manager rather than the homeowner. "Mark said you were staying home until this afternoon," Vanessa said, her tone sharp. "I scheduled the floral delivery under your name because someone needs to sign for the signature confirmation." "Then Mark can sign for it when he returns from his appointment," Martha said. She opened the heavy front door, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. "Or you can handle it yourself." Vanessa took a step forward, her expression tightening with frustration. "You're being remarkably unhelpful today, Martha. This event is critical for Mark's future at his firm. The least you could do is show some support." Martha paused on the top porch step, looking back at her daughter-in-law. "Support is built on mutual respect, Vanessa. It is not a one-way street." Without waiting for a response, Martha walked down the brick path to her sedan. She started the engine and drove away peacefully. Martha drove to the local bank in downtown Columbus. Inside the private office of her longtime financial advisor, Mr. Henderson, she reviewed the final settlement documents. 2 months ago, after realizing that Mark and Vanessa viewed her home as their eventual inheritance, rather than her sanctuary, Martha had placed the property on the market through a private commercial listing. She didn't want to live in a house full of mounting hostility, nor did she want to burden her son with an awkward eviction process while they cohabited. A buyer, a prominent local real estate investor named David Miller, had purchased the home in cash 3 weeks ago. The transaction had closed smoothly, and David had agreed to let Martha stay for 30 days to pack her belongings. According to the contract, the official possession date was set for 5 o'clock that very afternoon. Martha had planned to announce her move to Mark and Vanessa during dinner the following evening, but their recent behavior had accelerated her timeline. While sitting at Mr. Henderson's desk, Martha received a text message from Mark. "Mom, Vanessa said you walked out. The caterers are setting up tables in the dining room. Please come back and clear your remaining things out of the hallway closets so we can store coats." Martha looked at the message, her heart aching slightly for her son's blind obedience. Mark assumed that because his mother was a quiet, retired librarian, she would always yield to pressure. He had no idea that the house no longer belonged to her, or that he and Vanessa were organizing an elaborate private party on real estate owned by a complete stranger. Martha didn't reply to the text. She signed the final transfer receipt, accepted the official closing check, and placed it safely inside her banking portfolio. Everything was now legally sealed, completely non-refundable, and entirely beyond her son's control. She thanked Mr. Henderson, took a deep breath, and drove toward her newly rented condominium on the north side. Martha spent the early afternoon at her new 2-bedroom condominium in German Village, overseeing the arrival of a small moving truck she had hired weeks ago. The movers unloaded several boxes containing her clothes, her books, and Arthur's vintage tools. The condo was bright, modern, and quiet. For the first time in months, Martha felt a profound sense of relief. She was no longer living in a home where her presence was treated as an inconvenience. At 3 o'clock, she drove back toward the Craftsman house to collect her remaining personal luggage and her late husband's documents from her bedroom safe. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw 3 catering vans parked along the curb. Valet parking signs had been erected on the front lawn without her permission. Martha walked through the front door carrying her keys. The living room had been entirely transformed. Her comfortable sofa had been pushed into the hallway to make room for high-top cocktail tables covered in black tablecloths. Servers in black vests were carrying trays of champagne flutes into the kitchen. Vanessa was standing near the fireplace, wearing an expensive emerald dress and giving orders to the catering manager. When she noticed Martha holding a small suitcase, she walked over quickly, her eyes narrowing. "Where have you been?" Vanessa demanded in a hushed, angry voice. "We have 40 high-profile guests arriving in less than 2 hours. Why are you carrying a suitcase through the foyer? It looks completely chaotic." "I came to pick up my personal belongings," Martha said evenly. "Well, keep them out of sight," Vanessa snapped, checking her wristwatch. "Mark's regional VP is already in town. We cannot afford any awkward disruptions. I asked you yesterday to stay away for the evening, Martha. Please go upstairs, stay in your room, or leave until tomorrow morning." Martha looked at Vanessa's polished facade and felt no anger, only clarity. She turned toward the stairs without another word to retrieve her remaining bag. Upstairs in her bedroom, Martha packed her remaining clothing into 2 large leather duffel bags. She took the framed photo of Arthur from her nightstand and slipped it carefully into her purse. Everything else in the room had already been cleared or sold with the property as part of the staging arrangement with David Miller. Downstairs, the sound of classical music began to filter up through the floorboards. Martha heard doors opening and closing as guests started arriving early. By 4:30, the house was filling with voices, laughter, and the clinking of wine glasses. Mark and Vanessa had effectively turned Martha's personal sanctuary into a corporate banquet hall. Martha sat on the edge of the bare mattress and pulled out her phone. She called David Miller, the real estate investor, who now held the legal deed to 1428 Elmwood Avenue. "Hello, Mrs. Evans," David said, answering on the second ring. His voice was professional and polite. "Is everything going smoothly with your final walkthrough?" "David, I am calling to inform you that I have completely cleared my personal items from the property," Martha said, keeping her tone calm and steady. "However, there is an issue you should be aware of before you arrive." David sounded surprised. "An issue? Is there damage?" "No damage," Martha explained. "My son and daughter-in-law have organized an unauthorized corporate reception inside the house today. There are currently caterers, servers, and approximately 40 guests occupying the living room and kitchen." There was a moment of silence on the line. "An unauthorized gathering," David repeated, his tone sharpening instantly. "The closing was finalized at noon, Mrs. Evans. As of 5 o'clock today, liability for the property transfers entirely to my firm. I cannot have 40 uninsured strangers inside a commercial acquisition without an indemnity agreement." "I understand completely," Martha replied. "I will be waiting outside." "I will be at my car in 10 minutes, David stated firmly before hanging up. Martha smiled softly and stood up. At 4:45, Martha carried her final 2 duffel bags down the grand wooden staircase. The foyer was buzzing with corporate executives, attorneys, and local business owners. Vanessa was standing near the front door, wearing her emerald dress, holding a glass of wine, and chatting animatedly with Mark's regional vice president, a tall man named Richard. Mark was standing nearby, laughing nervously at a joke Richard had made. Neither of them noticed Martha descending the stairs until she set her heavy leather duffel bags down near the coat rack. Vanessa immediately stopped mid-sentence. Her smile vanished, replaced by an expression of sharp annoyance. She stepped away from the corporate vice president and walked briskly over to Martha, her heels clicking loudly on the polished oak floorboards. "Martha, what on earth are you doing?" Vanessa whispered furiously, leaning in so the surrounding guests wouldn't hear. "I told you specifically to stay out of sight. You are dragging luggage through the middle of a formal reception. Get out. You're embarrassing us." Mark hurried over, looking uncomfortable. He glanced at the guests who were starting to glance toward the foyer. "Mom, please," Mark said under his breath. "Why can't you just take your bags out to the garage? We're trying to make a good impression here. This event is supposed to establish us as key players in the community." "You don't need to worry about my luggage." "Mark," Martha said, her voice remaining perfectly steady and audible. "We do worry because it looks utterly tacky." Vanessa hissed, her cheeks flushing with anger. "This is our home now, Martha. We are hosting important people, and your bizarre behavior is ruining everything. Leave right now through the back door." Martha looked at Vanessa, then turned her gaze to her son. Mark lowered his head, refusing to defend his mother. "Very well," Martha said calmly. She picked up her bags and stepped out the front door. She pulled the heavy oak door closed behind her. Martha walked out onto the front porch and set her bags inside the trunk of her car. She didn't drive away. Instead, she stood quietly beside her vehicle, watching through the large front bay windows, as 40 guests milled about inside her former home. Caterers were carrying silver trays of miniature crab cakes, and laughter echoed softly through the evening air. At precisely 5 o'clock, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway and parked behind Martha's sedan. David Miller stepped out of the vehicle wearing a tailored navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Accompanying him was a uniformed security officer and a representative from his commercial property management team. David walked over to Martha, extending his hand in greeting. "Good evening, Mrs. Evans. You look remarkably composed given the circumstances." "Good evening, David," Martha said smoothly, shaking his hand. "Everything inside is packed and cleared on my end. The property is legally yours as of 5 minutes ago." David checked his watch, confirming the time. "Thank you for your honesty and cooperation, Mrs. Evans. My firm takes immediate legal possession as of 5 o'clock today. We have a zero-tolerance policy regarding unauthorized commercial use or uninsured public gatherings on our acquisitions." "I am aware," Martha replied. "I believe the current occupants are under the impression that they hold rights to this residence. They were quite insistent that I vacate the premises." David nodded gravely. "We will resolve that misconception immediately." Martha watched as David, his property manager, and the security officer walked up the brick walkway toward the front entrance. She did not follow them closely, preferring to observe from the porch steps. Inside, the music was still playing, completely oblivious to the fact that the legal owner had just arrived at the front door to claim his property. The heavy front door swung open, and David stepped inside with his team signaling the catering staff to immediately halt the music. Martha stood in silent grace. It was time. David Miller pushed open the front door and walked directly into the center of the living room, followed closely by his security officer. The classical music abruptly stopped as the security officer disconnected the sound system. A sudden, heavy silence fell across the crowded room. 40 corporate executives turned around, beverage glasses in hand, staring in confusion. Vanessa rushed forward, her emerald dress rustling loudly. "Excuse me. Who are you? This is a private corporate event. You cannot just walk into our home and turn off our music." David opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a certified copy of the deed, and held it up with calm authority. "My name is David Miller. I am the sole owner of 1428 Elmwood Avenue. The real estate transaction closed at noon today, and legal possession transferred to my holding company at 5 o'clock sharp." Mark stepped forward, his face turning ghostly pale. "Wait. What? That's impossible. This is my mother's house." "Your mother sold this property 3 weeks ago," David stated clearly, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "The sale was completed legally and independently. You have no lease agreement, no tenancy rights, and no authorization to hold a commercial event on these premises. Furthermore, this gathering presents an unacceptable insurance liability." Vanessa stood frozen, her jaw slightly open as 40 pair of eyes, including Mark's corporate superiors and regional executives, stared at her in absolute shock and embarrassment. "I am instructing everyone to clear the property immediately," David continued firmly. "If the premises are not vacated within 15 minutes, my security officer will file formal trespassing charges with the local police department." A wave of panic rippled through the crowd. Executive guests quickly set down their wine glasses, grabbed their coats, and began rushing out the front door in uncomfortable silence. Mark and Vanessa stood paralyzed as their grand networking event collapsed into utter humiliation. The catered party was over before it had even truly begun. The truth was finally revealed. Outside on the brick driveway, Mark ran out to Martha's sedan just as she was putting her car into drive. His face was pale and his hands were shaking violently as he knocked on her driver's side window. Martha rolled down the window halfway, looking at her son with a peaceful, untroubled expression. "Mom, why did you do this?" Mark choked out his voice, desperate. "You sold the house without telling us, Vanessa and I. We don't have anywhere to go. You completely destroyed my reputation in front of my entire company." "Mark," Martha said quietly, her voice full of calm authority. "You and Vanessa assumed this house was yours to command, and you treated me like an unwanted guest in my own home. You told me to leave because I embarrassed you. I simply gave you what you asked for, a clear space. Mom, please, we can talk about this," Mark begged, looking back at Vanessa, who was standing on the lawn in her emerald dress, weeping in anger as catering workers packed up their equipment around her. "Where are you going?" "I have bought a lovely condominium in German Village," Martha replied. "My life is moving forward, Mark. I love you, but I will no longer allow my generosity to be mistreated as obligation. If you wish to build a real relationship with me in the future, it will be based on mutual respect, not convenience." Martha rolled up her window. She drove down Elmwood Avenue, leaving behind the house where she had raised her family and the entitlement that had overtaken it. An hour later, Martha was sitting on the balcony of her new home, enjoying a hot cup of tea in her favorite porcelain mug. The air was cool, the neighborhood was quiet, and for the first time in years, her future belonged entirely to her. She'd closed her eyes, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves, feeling complete peace in her quiet new life.